It was a calm Saturday afternoon when the large shopping center downtown started to fill up with weekend visitors. Families pushed shopping carts down the aisles. Couples browsed through clothing racks and children ran between displays while parents tried to keep up. In one corner of the store, a woman in her early 40s quietly picked out a few items: a small kitchen set, a book, and a pair of gloves. She wore casual jeans, a jacket, and a baseball cap. To anyone watching, she looked like just another shopper enjoying her weekend. She moved with a sense of calm purpose, occasionally checking her phone as if replying to a message. After picking up everything she needed, she headed to the self-checkout lane where a few others were already scanning their purchases. She smiled politely at the person ahead of her and waited her turn. When it was her time, she placed her items on the small counter and started scanning each one. The machine beeped for every item she passed across the scanner, and she neatly placed them in her bag. When she finished, she inserted her card, paid, and took the printed receipt. Nothing seemed unusual. She walked slowly toward the exit, her bag in hand, adjusting her cap as she passed a row of advertisements near the door. But just before she could step outside, a security guard stepped forward and blocked her way. His tone was firm but not loud as he asked her to stop for a moment. "Ma'am, could you please come with me?" She looked at him confused and asked if something was wrong. The guard, avoiding eye contact, explained that the system had flagged an item as unpaid. The woman frowned slightly, saying she had scanned everything and had the receipt to prove it. She started to pull it from her bag, but the guard motioned for her to follow him to the small security office near the back of the store. Customers nearby slowed down to watch as the two walked together. Some whispered quietly. The woman looked uncomfortable but calm, holding her bag close. Inside the small office, two more guards stood beside a monitor showing store camera feeds. One of them pointed to a paused video that appeared to show her scanning items. They replayed a short clip, zooming in on the checkout machine. According to the footage, one of the items, in the pair of gloves, didn't make a scanning sound. The machine's screen showed no record of it being purchased. The guard told her this looked like a missed scan and that they were required to report such incidents. The woman explained politely that it must have been a machine error. She showed her receipt and card transaction. She even offered to pay again if there was an issue. But the guard said they had to call the police because store policy required them to report all suspected thefts, even small ones. The woman's calm expression shifted slightly. She wasn't angry, but there was disbelief in her eyes. She told them again that she had done nothing wrong, that she had no reason to take anything without paying, and that the machine must have glitched. But the guards insisted they had to follow procedure. One of them called the local police. Within minutes, two officers arrived. They entered the store quickly, speaking to the guards in hushed voices before turning to the woman. Customers in nearby aisles started noticing the commotion and began gathering near the scene. Some took out their phones. The woman, standing straight, tried to explain the situation again, that she had paid, that she had the receipt, and that the issue was clearly a machine error. But the officers seemed focused on the report they had received. One officer asked her to hand over her bag so they could check the contents. She did, keeping her voice steady. They pulled out the items, checking each one against the receipt. Everything matched except for the pair of gloves. "It doesn't show up here," one officer said. The woman leaned forward slightly. "That's the item the scanner didn't beep for," she said. "It must have missed it. I didn't realize. I can pay for it right now if that's the issue." But the officers exchanged a look. One of them said the matter had to be handled formally since the store had already made a report. The woman's voice became firmer now, though still calm. She asked them to verify her identity, to listen to her explanation before jumping to conclusions. She even mentioned she worked in law enforcement herself, though she didn't go into details. The officers, however, seemed doubtful. They said anyone could claim that. They asked her for identification, but since she wasn't carrying her work ID, she had come straight from home. They didn't believe her fully. After a few more exchanges, one of the officers asked her to place her hands behind her back. The moment felt unreal. She blinked, unsure if she heard correctly. People nearby gasped. She hesitated for a second, then slowly complied. The clicking sound of the handcuffs echoed through the small room. One of the customers in the store had started recording from a distance, capturing the scene through the glass door of the security office. The woman, handcuffed and calm, tried once more to speak. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. But her words didn't seem to reach them. The officers escorted her outside toward their patrol car. Dozens of shoppers stood frozen, whispering as the scene unfolded. Some expressed sympathy, others judgment. Someone muttered, "She doesn't look like a thief." Another said, "You never know these days." Outside, the sky had started to turn golden with the late afternoon sun. The woman glanced around briefly, scanning the faces in the crowd, perhaps realizing how quickly perception can change, how a misunderstanding could strip someone of dignity in seconds. She was placed in the back seat of the car, still handcuffed, still silent. The drive to the precinct was short, but it felt like forever. The air in the car was tense. The officers in front exchanged minimal words. One of them finally said, "If you really are who you say you are, this will be sorted out soon." The woman didn't respond. She stared out the window, watching the city blur past. Familiar streets, corners she had driven through countless times in uniform. It was almost surreal that now she was being taken there as a suspect. When they arrived, she was processed like anyone else. The routine questions, the forms, the fingerprints, every step done by officers who had no idea who she was. She kept her composure, answering every question carefully. Inside, however, she felt a mix of frustration and disbelief. How quickly things could turn. At the same time, the video taken by the bystander was spreading online. Within an hour, it had reached hundreds of shares. Comments poured in, people arguing, speculating, making judgments. Some claimed she was treated unfairly. Others defended the officers. But soon, sharp-eyed viewers recognized her face. They compared it with public photos from community events, news stories, and press briefings. And realization began to spread. The woman arrested at the store looked a lot like a local police captain. Back at the station, the woman sat quietly in a small interview room, hands resting on the table. The officers reviewed her statement while she waited. She wasn't shouting or angry and just tired and oddly calm. She knew that anger wouldn't help. After nearly 2 hours, a higher-ranking officer arrived looking concerned. He had just been notified about the arrest and had confirmed her identity. The younger officer's expressions shifted from confident to pale as the truth sank in. They had just arrested one of their own, a well-known captain with years of service and a spotless record. The officer in charge apologized immediately, saying it was all a misunderstanding that they hadn't known. The captain nodded quietly, saying she understood they were following procedure, though her tone carried the quiet weight of disappointment. She asked to speak to someone from internal affairs to clear the matter properly. By that time, the online storm was growing. Local news outlets had picked up the video, running headlines about a shoplifting arrest involving an off-duty officer. Viewers were divided. Some demanded accountability from the store and the police for humiliating her publicly. Others argued that no one should be above the law. At home, her phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, colleagues, and community members all reached out in shock. She had always been known for her fairness and humility, the kind of officer who treated everyone with respect. To see her handcuffed in public was something no one could comprehend. As night fell, the precinct grew quiet. The captain was finally released after verification, her record untouched. She thanked the senior officer for resolving it, but said little else. She walked outside, breathing in the cool air, staring at the lights of the city. What had started as a simple shopping trip had turned into a public spectacle, one that would soon grow beyond her control. Somewhere, deep inside, she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It was about how easily mistakes could happen, how quick judgment could spread, and how trust, both inside and outside the force, could be shaken by a single moment of misunderstanding. The next morning, the city woke up to a story that had already gone viral overnight. A video from the shopping mall had spread across social media faster than anyone expected. The short clip showed a woman being handcuffed by 2 police officers while several people looked on. Her calm but pained expression made the video even more powerful. By sunrise, local news pages were already running headlines. "Shoplifting arrest caught on camera," one post read. Another said, "Woman claims innocence after being detained at local store." The video had been shared thousands of times with people arguing in the comments. Some thought it was a routine arrest. Others felt something about it seemed wrong, too harsh, too public. A few hours later, someone on social media noticed something familiar about the woman in the video. Her face, even half covered by a cap, resembled someone they had seen in local news before. Soon, comparisons began appearing side by side. A screenshot from the video and a photo from a police department press conference months earlier. The resemblance was undeniable. Within minutes, people began saying it out loud. The woman arrested wasn't an ordinary shopper. She was a police captain. That revelation changed everything. The comment sections exploded with disbelief. "Wait, she's a cop?" One user wrote. "You mean they arrested their own?" Another replied. The tone of the entire conversation shifted. What had started as a random viral clip suddenly became a debate about law enforcement, fairness, and the way people are treated, even when they wear a badge. By mid-morning, the story had reached television news. Reporters stood outside the department store describing how the incident unfolded. They played the same video clip repeatedly. The moment the captain was handcuffed, the crowd around her whispering, the uncertainty on her face. News anchors discussed whether this was a case of misunderstanding or misconduct. Inside the police department, phones wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted statements. The public demanded answers. Officers who had known the captain for years watched the footage in disbelief. Some were angry, others embarrassed. A few simply shook their heads, saying it was all too surreal. The captain herself stayed quiet that morning. She didn't speak to the press or post anything online. She sat at home drinking coffee, watching the news replay scenes of her own arrest. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Colleagues reaching out, friends sending support, others just asking if she was all right. She replied to almost none of them. She didn't want to add to the noise. Meanwhile, public opinion was dividing fast. Some people argued that no one, not even a police officer, should be treated differently. If she really didn't pay, it's the same rule for everyone, one comment said. Others were outraged that the arrest was made without verifying the full situation. She literally told them who she was, another person wrote. They didn't even check. That's not justice. That's carelessness. Online discussions turned into heated debates. Radio hosts started talking about it. Callers gave their opinions, some defending the officers, others siding with the captain. The city's mayor released a short statement saying the situation was under review and urged the public not to jump to conclusions until the facts were clear. But that didn't calm anyone down. Later that day, a short video message was released by the police department's spokesperson. Standing at a podium, the spokesperson confirmed that the woman in the video was indeed a serving captain and that the department had opened an internal review. The spokesperson also said that the captain had been placed on temporary administrative leave while the investigation continued. That announcement only made the story grow larger. News channels replayed the press statement on loop. Reporters speculated what would happen next. The captain's years of service, her awards, and her leadership in community programs all became part of the conversation. People who once saw her as a symbol of fairness now watched her being treated as a suspect, and many couldn't believe it. Throughout the day, new details emerged. The store's management released a statement of their own. They claimed the security system had flagged an unpaid item, and that the guards were following standard policy. They didn't apologize, only said they were cooperating with authorities. That made the public even angrier. Online, people began sharing personal stories of being wrongly accused in stores, of machines not scanning items correctly, of feeling embarrassed or powerless in similar situations. Many connected emotionally to what the captain must have felt: confusion, disbelief, humiliation. At the same time, there were people defending the process. They said store staff and officers couldn't have known who she was, that they were just doing their jobs, that the rules should apply to everyone. And while that point made sense to some, others argued it wasn't about special treatment, it was about fairness and basic respect. Late that evening, the captain finally decided to speak. She didn't call a press conference or make a long statement. She posted a short message on her private social media account, which someone later shared publicly. It said, "I understand the public interest in what happened. I only ask for patience. The truth will come out. I have faith in the process even when it's difficult." Her message was calm and careful, much like her personality. It didn't attack anyone, didn't blame the officers, didn't accuse the store, but it carried a quiet strength that people recognized. That simple post was shared thousands of times with people commenting words of support and respect. Inside the department, however, things were tense. The chief called an emergency meeting. Senior officers sat around a long table discussing the impact of the viral video. Some worried about public trust. Others feared this incident might be seen as proof of deeper issues about how the system treats even its own members. The arresting officers were called in for questioning. They looked nervous, unsure how to defend their actions. They insisted they hadn't known who she was, that they followed protocol. But even they admitted that maybe things could have been handled better. As the night went on, news channels aired interviews with people who had worked with the captain before. One former colleague described her as the kind of officer who never raised her voice but always got things done. Another said she was the first to defend someone who was wrongly accused. Hearing those words replayed on television made the situation feel even more painful. The following morning, reporters stood outside her house hoping for a comment. She didn't come out. Cameras flashed every time someone walked past her gate, hoping to catch a glimpse. Neighbors spoke quietly to journalists, describing her as polite and reserved, someone who kept to herself and always offered a smile. Meanwhile, across the city, people were beginning to question how easily assumptions could be made. It became more than just a story about one arrest. It was about how people are treated when they look ordinary, how quickly society can judge before understanding. At schools, teachers brought it up during discussions about fairness and justice. At offices, workers debated it over lunch. Some said it showed that the system worked because the same rules applied to everyone. Others argued it showed the opposite, that fairness depends too much on perception and circumstance. Everywhere she went online, the captain saw people's opinions about her. Some defended her fiercely. Others questioned her actions without knowing the facts. It was strange to see her own life turned into a public argument. But she stayed quiet, trusting that evidence would clear her name. The pressure on the department grew. The chief eventually held a press conference asking for calm. He said the investigation was ongoing and that everyone involved would be treated fairly. But the public wasn't satisfied. They wanted answers. The captain's colleagues felt uneasy too. Many had worked under her command. Some felt guilty for not speaking out sooner. Others were afraid of saying the wrong thing. The whole department felt like it was holding its breath. As the week went on, new versions of the video appeared online, slowed down, analyzed, with people pointing out details like the missing scan sound or the way she held her bag. Amateur investigators on social media created theories, each claiming to know what really happened. But what stood out most was not the video itself. It was her calmness during the entire incident. Even while being handcuffed, she didn't fight, didn't shout, didn't insult anyone. That composure, many said, spoke louder than words. Gradually, public opinion began to lean in her favor. People who had once doubted her started to wonder how easily things could have gone wrong for anyone. The story was no longer just about a police captain. It had become a reflection of everyday people's experiences, about judgment, misunderstanding, and the fine line between justice and humiliation. By the end of the week, major national news outlets had picked up the story. It wasn't just local anymore. Talk shows invited experts to discuss what it revealed about trust in law enforcement and technology. Editorial writers described it as a test of accountability within the system. And somewhere in the middle of all that noise, the captain sat quietly, still waiting. Waiting for the investigation to finish, waiting for the truth to surface, waiting for people to see her not as a headline, but as a person who had simply gone shopping one afternoon and found herself trapped in a storm she never saw coming. The week after the arrest felt heavier than any the department had faced in years. The building, usually filled with quiet chatter and routine movement, now carried an air of unease. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same topic, the captain's arrest. Even those who barely knew her had opinions. Some whispered that the department had handled it poorly. Others said it was a misunderstanding that had spun out of control. Everyone agreed on one thing, though. It was a mess. Inside the chief's office, a meeting was underway. The blinds were closed, the room silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Several senior officers sat around the table, their faces tense. The chief looked exhausted, his hands pressed together as he listened to updates from internal affairs. Reports were coming in from every direction. Public complaints, news requests, online reactions. It wasn't just about one arrest anymore. It was about the reputation of the entire department. She served for over 15 years without a single mark on her record, one of the officers said. She's led multiple operations, trained new recruits, volunteered for community programs. And now this. This is what people are talking about. Another officer sighed. We can't ignore it. The video's everywhere. The public wants answers and the department looks divided. The chief leaned back, rubbing his forehead. Then we'll find the truth. Whatever it is. His voice was tired but steady. But we're not going to throw one of our own under the bus or protect anyone unfairly. We handle this by the book. Meanwhile, the captain spent her days mostly at home. Her house, once a place she returned to after long shifts, now felt unfamiliar. The curtains stayed drawn most of the time. She didn't go out much, except for short walks late in the evening when the streets were empty. Neighbors waved kindly when they saw her, but she could sense the unspoken questions in their eyes. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls she didn't answer. Journalists, distant acquaintances, even strangers offering support. Some sent letters. A few dropped off flowers at her door. It was kind but also overwhelming. She didn't know what to say to any of them. The hardest part for her wasn't the embarrassment. It was the silence from the department she had given so many years to. She understood there was a process, but the waiting ate at her. Every hour felt long, and every rumor she heard online felt like a new wound. Inside the department, the younger officers felt the tension the most. They admired her, many of them having trained under her guidance. They whispered among themselves in the break room, remembering how she had always treated everyone equally, never raising her voice, always patient. One officer recalled how she once bought lunch for a rookie who forgot his wallet. Another remembered her staying late after a long shift just to help finish paperwork for someone who was struggling. Now, the idea that she could have stolen something felt impossible to them. And yet the system they all served demanded neutrality. They couldn't take sides openly. The arresting officers were still under review. They came to work quietly, avoiding eye contact with others. Every move they made felt watched. Though they insisted they followed procedure, they couldn't escape the guilt that maybe they had misread the situation. In the middle of the week, the department called for a formal hearing. The internal affairs team gathered all the footage, both from the store's cameras and the officers' body cams. They watched everything frame by frame. The video showed the captain at the self-checkout counter, scanning her items. She appeared focused and unaware that one of the items hadn't registered. When the machine beeped softly after each scan, there was one moment where it didn't, but she placed the item in the bag anyway, believing it had scanned properly. The investigators noted how she paused for a moment, looked at the screen, then continued. There was no sign of intentional theft. She wasn't looking around nervously or trying to hide anything. It was a normal checkout, except for one missing beep. When they played the store's security audio, they confirmed it clearly. The scanner had failed to detect the barcode due to a technical glitch. The timestamp matched perfectly with the moment she placed the gloves into her bag. The head investigator sat back in his chair after reviewing the footage. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "This wasn't a theft. It was a system error." That evening, he brought the findings to the chief. The chief watched the video himself, his face unreadable. When it ended, he sat in silence for a few seconds, then said, "Get this documented. We'll need to handle it carefully." The next morning, word began to spread quietly through the department. The evidence cleared her. Some officers smiled in relief. Others muttered under their breath, "Finally." But no one dared say much aloud. The investigation still had to go through official channels before anything could be made public. The chief decided to visit the captain personally. When he arrived at her home, she looked surprised to see him standing at the door. He greeted her respectfully and asked if he could come in. They sat in the living room where sunlight filtered weakly through the curtains. He told her what they had found, how the video confirmed her version of the story, how the scanner had failed, how the incident was purely a misunderstanding. She listened quietly, her eyes focused on the floor for most of it. After a moment, she said softly, "I tried to tell them. I really did." "I know," he replied, "and I'm sorry this happened. It should have been handled differently." She nodded but didn't speak. The relief was there, but so was exhaustion. She had spent days being judged by people who didn't know her. questioned by strangers, and doubted by her own team. The chief assured her that her name would be cleared publicly, that the department would issue an official statement. She thanked him, but her tone carried a quiet sadness, the kind that comes not from anger, but from disappointment. By afternoon, the department's spokesperson released a short update to the press, confirming that the investigation had found no wrongdoing by the captain. They explained the checkout machine error and stated that all charges had been dropped. But instead of calming the storm, the announcement started a new wave of anger, this time directed at how she had been treated during the arrest. Reporters demanded to know why no one had verified her story before handcuffing her. Commentators on television questioned the judgment of the responding officers. On social media, people shared clips of her calm voice saying, "You're making a mistake," and compared it with the later footage proving she was right. The department's reputation took a hit. For days, the city couldn't stop talking about it. Some accused the police of being too quick to act without understanding the situation. Others said it showed how even honest people could be humiliated because of rigid rules. The arresting officers faced an internal review of their conduct, not for the arrest itself, but for failing to verify key information before taking action. They were not fired, but the experience left a deep mark on them. One of them later admitted privately that he hadn't slept properly since the incident. For the captain, the following days were filled with quiet reflection. She didn't celebrate being cleared. Instead, she thought about how easily things had spiraled, how quickly people had judged her without waiting for the truth. She thought about the countless people who didn't have the platform or reputation she had, and people who might not get the same chance to prove their innocence. That thought stayed with her more than anything else. By the end of the week, the department held a private meeting with her to discuss her return. The chief told her that while she had been cleared, she could take more time off if she needed. She looked at him and said, "I'll be back soon. I just need a little time to breathe." That night, she took another quiet walk through her neighborhood. The air was cool, the streets mostly empty. She looked up at the city lights and felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, gratitude, and disbelief that a simple shopping trip could have turned into a national discussion. She didn't blame anyone directly, but she knew things had to change. Procedures had to improve. Empathy had to come first. Maybe, she thought, this could still lead to something good, if people were willing to learn from it. For now, she simply kept walking one slow step after another, letting the night swallow the noise of the world around her. Days passed after the official statement was released, but the story didn't fade away. If anything, it grew even larger. News channels replayed the department's press release again and again, analyzing every word. The captain's name was cleared, but people weren't satisfied. They wanted more than a correction. They wanted accountability. Across social media, people started questioning everything about the case. Why had the arrest happened so publicly? Why hadn't anyone checked her story before humiliating her in front of a crowd? Some said it was just a tragic mistake. Others believed it revealed deeper problems about judgment, bias, and how quickly people could turn on someone without listening. A well-known news host invited a panel to discuss the issue on live television. One guest, a former officer, said calmly, "This wasn't just about a checkout error. It's about trust. It's about how we treat people before we know the truth." That line was shared thousands of times online. For the captain, the attention felt both comforting and exhausting. She appreciated the support, but she didn't enjoy being the center of a national debate. Her goal had never been to make headlines. She just wanted her life to go back to normal. But deep down, she knew things would never be quite the same again. In the days that followed, more evidence surfaced, not because she demanded it, but because investigators wanted to close the case properly. The store's security company released a full report showing that the self-checkout scanner had failed multiple times that same day with other customers. Meanwhile, the captain met with internal affairs for a final debrief. The officers were polite, almost overly careful in their words. One of them said quietly, "You handled yourself with more grace than most would have." She nodded, her expression unreadable. When the meeting ended, she walked through the familiar hallways of the department, the same ones she had walked for years, and felt how different they seemed now. People who once greeted her warmly looked awkward, unsure of what to say. A few stopped her to apologize, though none of them had been directly involved. She accepted their words with a small smile, but deep down it hurt that so many had stayed silent when it mattered most. A few journalists reached out to her, asking for interviews. She declined them all. She didn't want to add to the noise. But one evening, as she sat by her window watching the city lights flicker, she started thinking that maybe silence wasn't helping either. The story had already gone beyond her. It had become a symbol for how easily misunderstanding could destroy someone's dignity. Maybe if she spoke, it could do some good. A few days later, she agreed to a single interview with a trusted local journalist she'd known for years. It wasn't a dramatic, televised conversation, just a quiet, honest talk in her living room. The journalist asked gentle questions, focusing on how she felt rather than what happened. "I wasn't angry," she said softly. "I was disappointed, not just in how I was treated, but in how quickly people were ready to believe the worst. I've spent my whole career teaching others to look for the full story before making judgments. But that day, no one wanted to listen." She paused, then added, "Still, I don't want revenge or apologies. I just want this to remind people that anyone, even someone who wears the badge, can be on the other side of a mistake. And that's why empathy matters." When the interview aired, it touched people deeply. Her calm voice, her refusal to attack anyone, and her sincerity made the clip go viral for all the right reasons. Even critics of the police force praised her for her humility and grace. Comments flooded in from people across the country thanking her for speaking with such honesty. That same week, the department announced a new training program. It focused on how officers should handle suspected thefts in public spaces, how to verify facts before taking action, and how to communicate more respectfully with those being questioned. The program was inspired by what had happened to the captain, though her name wasn't mentioned in the official materials. Some officers privately admitted that her case had opened their eyes. They realized how easy it was to get caught up in procedure and forget the human being in front of them. One young officer said, "I don't ever want to make someone feel the way she must have felt that day." The captain was invited to help shape the training sessions. At first, she hesitated. She wasn't sure she wanted to relive the experience. But after some thought, she agreed. If her story could prevent even one person from going through what she did, it would be worth it. When she walked into the training room for the first time, every officer there stood as a sign of respect. She didn't give a long speech. She simply told the story from her perspective, how it felt to be judged, how it felt to lose control of the situation even when she knew she was innocent. Her words were simple, but the silence in the room showed they had landed deeply. Outside the department, the story continued to inspire conversations. Schools discussed it in ethics classes. Journalists wrote about the importance of accountability. Community leaders said it was a wake-up call about empathy in positions of power. The captain received hundreds of letters from people she had never met. Letters from strangers who thanked her for her courage and honesty. Some shared their own experiences of being falsely accused, describing how her story made them feel seen. She read every letter carefully, sometimes smiling, sometimes wiping away tears. One evening, while sitting in her kitchen with a cup of tea, she looked through a small pile of letters again. There was one from a mother who wrote, "My son was once accused of stealing something he didn't take. No one believed him. Your story helped him see that good people can still be misunderstood. Thank you for showing strength without hate." Those words stayed with her. They gave her a sense of peace she hadn't felt in weeks. By now, most people knew the full truth, that she hadn't stolen anything, that it was a system error, that her composure during the arrest had shown her true character. But she didn't take comfort in being right. What mattered to her was that the experience had sparked change. Even so, not everything healed overnight. Some parts of the public still viewed the situation through their own lenses. Some believed she had received special treatment because of her rank, while others felt she had been treated worse because she was a woman in authority. But she had learned to let go of those discussions. People would always have opinions. The truth didn't depend on them. One quiet afternoon, she visited the same department store for the first time since that day. She went alone, without calling ahead, just to see if she could walk through the doors without feeling that sting of memory. The moment she stepped inside, her chest tightened slightly, but she kept walking. The smell of new clothes, the sound of carts rolling, the hum of small talk. Everything was the same, yet everything was different. A young cashier recognized her and looked nervous. "I'm so sorry for what happened," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "It's all right," she replied. "We all learn from our mistakes. I just hope your scanners work better now." They both laughed lightly, breaking the tension. She left after buying a few small items, scanning each one carefully, making sure to listen for every single beep before walking out. As she stepped into the sunlight, she took a deep breath. It felt like a small but meaningful victory, not against anyone, but against the memory of that moment. Later that night, she wrote a short note in her journal. "Sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that teach us the most. I don't regret what happened. It reminded me why compassion matters, not just in uniform but in everyday life." The storm around her was finally starting to quiet, but the message she carried from it, that people deserve to be heard before they're judged, would continue to echo far beyond her own story. The weeks that followed the incident were filled with reflection and subtle change. The captain returned fully to her duties at the department, but the atmosphere was different. Officers greeted her with more respect than before, not because she had been cleared, but because everyone understood how easily a person's dignity could be compromised. She felt a quiet satisfaction in that, even though the experience had been exhausting. At work, she noticed small improvements. Officers approached situations with more care, double-checking facts and listening more closely to those involved in disputes. The new training sessions she had helped design had begun, emphasizing empathy alongside procedure. She saw younger officers practicing patience during role-play exercises, asking questions instead of making assumptions. It gave her hope that even a small mistake could lead to meaningful change. The captain also spent time reflecting personally. She walked through the city streets more often, observing ordinary life in a way she hadn't before. She watched street vendors greet their customers with smiles, people navigating crowded buses, and children running in parks. Each moment reminded her that every person had a story and deserved to be treated with fairness and understanding. Despite the attention, she remained humble. When asked about the incident in interviews, she kept her responses short, focusing on the lessons learned rather than herself. "It's not about me," she said quietly in one televised discussion. "It's about how we treat others. Anyone could be on the other side of a misunderstanding. We must never forget that." Her calm, sincere tone resonated with viewers. People praised her for speaking without anger, for acknowledging the human side of mistakes, and for turning a personal ordeal into a message of hope. Outside work, the captain noticed a shift in how people approached her. Neighbors who had been cautious or curious now offered smiles and greetings. Community members she had known for years approached her respectfully, expressing support or simply sharing stories of times they had felt misunderstood. Those small interactions reminded her that the world was still full of good people, even amidst chaos. Yet the experience had also taught her caution. She became more observant in public spaces, aware of how easily situations could escalate or be misinterpreted. She took care with her personal information, avoiding unnecessary exposure online, but she didn't allow fear to dominate her life. She continued shopping, walking in her neighborhood, and engaging with her community, small acts of normalcy that affirmed her resilience. The store where the arrest had occurred eventually reached out privately. They offered a formal apology for the mishandling of the situation. It wasn't a grand gesture, no media statements, no public acknowledgement, but it was sincere. They had reviewed their policies, updated training for staff, and improved their self-checkout systems. For the captain, the apology wasn't about closure as much as it was about seeing real steps toward preventing future mistakes.